The stories of World War II are characterized by human valor, horrific atrocity, and geopolitical shifts on an unprecedented scale. But there's something else too: technology. Tech has been part of warfare since ancient times, but the 20th century saw machinery of frightening sophistication enter the fray for the first time. In the First World War, pilots in Sopwith camels and Fokker Eindeckers jousted with one another above the trenches of France and Belgium, while the lumbering armoured hulls of rudimentary tanks crawled across battlefields for the first time at the Somme in 1916. By the Second World War, however, the landscape was different. Very, very different. Flimsy, open structures had given way to robust, agile Spitfires, Mustangs, and Messerschmitts, along with the long-range bombers that would serve so devastatingly from Coventry to Dresden to Nagasaki. On the ground, the clanking and cumbersome proto-tanks had become swift, highly maneuverable war machines, and hardware like the German Panther and the Soviet T-34 has since transformed into the stuff of legend. Today we're going to be looking at one of the most famous, celebrated, mythologized tanks of the war, the German Tiger tank. Most agree she was the most powerful tank of the war, but was she the best? Like with many feats of engineering wizardry, both in peacetime and wartime, the Tiger's development was influenced by a problem-solution dynamic. A large, heavy tank had been in development since January 1937, and the early proto-Tigers resembled tougher, bulkier versions of the already popular Panzer Light tank. An initial design, the Durchbruchwagen, or breakthrough vehicle, was abandoned in 1938, and the German army turned its attention toward the even more robust VK30.01 and VK36.01 models. But it was the outbreak of the war the following year that brought the problem that would need to be resolved. Speed, agility, and withering brutality saw the Blitzkrieg sweep across Western Europe in the opening months of the war, and the light Panzer tank was highly effective in this. This is not to say that the German advance did not falter here and there, and stiff resistance in the form of the French Samoa S-35 and Char B-1 and the British Matilda II tanks left the German command with a conundrum on their hands. A year later, the Blitzkrieg was rolling eastwards as Operation Barbarossa saw the greatest mobilization of troops in history. The full might of the Wehrmacht was unleashed upon the Soviet Union, but here too there was friction and failure. Even before the dogged defense of cities like Stalingrad and Leningrad began, the advancing Germans found themselves struggling against superior T-34 medium tanks and the monstrous KV-1 heavy tanks. Victories in the west and in the east gave Germany the advantage, but as General Guderian swept ever deeper into Russia, he may well have considered the words he'd uttered some 4 years earlier. If the tanks succeed, Guderian had said, then victory follows. There was no guarantee that Germany's tanks would succeed. If the ultimate aims of the Blitzkrieg were to be realized, the German Heer armed forces would need a new weapon. A far better weapon than anything the British or Soviets could throw at them. By 1942, the Tiger I was in service. While the vehicle had been rushed through the final design and development phases, it was still a seriously impressive beast. Almost 6.5 meters from front to back and weighing in at 57 tons when fully laden for combat, the Tiger would have been quite a sight to behold. With the gun included, the vehicle was closer to 8.5 meters in length, more than 3.5 meters wide and 3 meters tall. It was also encased in armor with 100mm thick plates protecting the frontal hull and turret of the Tiger, and plates ranging from 120mm to 200mm in thickness elsewhere, welded together to create a formidable set of defenses. The main gun of the Tiger was the 56 caliber 8.8cm KWK-36, a weapon that could be devastating at both long and short ranges. Designed to be accurate, punishing, and versatile, The KWK could fire the Panzergranate 39 capped armor-piercing round, the Panzergranate 40 composite rigid armor-piercing round, and the Granate 39 Hollodung high-explosive anti-tank round, although keeping the Tiger and her crew fully supplied would prove difficult later in the war. This beast was driven by a 21.35 litre 12-cylinder petrol engine developed by Maybach and capable of achieving a top speed of 38 km per hour. In later versions, the engine was upgraded, expanding the capacity and pushing the power output levels from 650 to 700 horsepower. On the surface, this was a masterpiece of engineering, but would this translate to success in the field? While Nazi engineers and strategists had been watching the progress of the Blitzkrieg carefully, they were not alone. The Americans had been watching too, and they'd been learning a lot. The United States knew that Guderian was right. A tank victory was crucial to overall success in the field. And so, the M4 Sherman was born and entered service in 1942, the same year as the Tiger. Variants of the Sherman ranged from 2.62 meters to 3 meters in width and between 5.84 and 6.27 meters in length. Substantially smaller than the Tiger, although her height was similar. Like the Tiger, the Sherman could carry 5 crew members who would be protected by armor plating across the hull, turret, and all other areas of the tank. This armor plating was not quite as robust as that of the Tiger. The front of the hull was encased in 50.8mm thick armor, around half the thickness of the Tiger's armor, although the angled design pushed the effective thickness beyond 90.8mm. The turret featured armor plates between 25.4mm and 76.2mm in thickness, far thinner than the Tiger's beefy protection, although the effectiveness of this was also boosted by the angled design. Various tweaks and upgrades were made to this armor across the tank's operational history, eliminating weak points and better protecting the crew members within. Primary firepower was provided by 75mm M3 guns, although 76mm variants and even 105mm howitzers featured on some models. These were backed up by Browning machine guns as a secondary armament. Not quite so heavily armed nor so heavily armored as Germany's behemoth, the Sherman had its work cut out for it against the Tiger. And yet, despite the apparent technological advantage, the Germans were pushed back across France following the Normandy landings, eventually retreating into the very heartlands of Germany itself. So just how did the Sherman emerge victorious in Western Europe? Germany's tank battalions earned themselves a legendary reputation, and deservedly so. Tank units were instrumental in smashing the resistance in Western Europe in the early years of the war, and then on the Eastern Front as the Wehrmacht savaged the Russian forces. The mythology surrounding the German hardware largely turned out to be true. The far lighter Sherman, for example, paled in comparison with the Tiger I, and the arrival of the Tiger II, or King Tiger, tipped the scales even further in Germany's favor. It was said that a Tiger II could withstand the onslaught of 10 or even more Shermans, and this rumor was frequently proven right on the battlefield. The long-range guns could pick off these Allied war machines at a distance, while the formidable armor plating repelled most attacks. A well-crewed, fully armed Tiger laying waste to an armored column devastated enemy morale. These juggernauts scored significant victories even late in the war, at Gumbinnen on the Eastern Front and in the Ardennes in the West. So, what went wrong? If the Tigers were so formidable, why were the Germans pushed back in their final years of the war? If the Tiger was such a brilliant piece of design, why did it backfire so badly? There are a few things to consider here. The first being the semi-literal elephant in the room. The Tiger was enormous. While this made it difficult to beat in open combat, it also made the vehicle difficult to maneuver and vulnerable to flanking maneuvers. Without cover, a Tiger might be a match for a dozen Shermans, but Allied commanders quickly learned to use the agility and swiftness of their machines to their advantage. Next, we've got a word that so often gets used to describe the Tiger: over-engineered. The tank was a serious feat of design and development, and this showed on the battlefield. But while complex problems lead to complex solutions, the reverse is also true, especially once these solutions start breaking down. It was difficult for the Wehrmacht's tank crew to keep the Tiger in the field, and this rapidly became an issue. It wasn't just difficult to keep Tigers in the field, it was difficult to get them there in the first place. Building a Tiger required vast amounts of material and manpower. It also required infrastructure and resources. While the tank producing factories in places like Kassel were working at full capacity under the shield of the Luftwaffe, and as the country expanded its territory into the resource-rich lands of Russia, this wasn't a problem. When Allied bombers began to pound German industry day and night, and the workforce was siphoned off by an ever-receding front line, it did become a problem. A big problem. Of course, industrial might wasn't a uniquely German phenomenon. Across the Atlantic, and safe from energy bombing raids, American factories went into overdrive. If a Tiger could knock out 12 Shermans, then there'd better be at least 13 Shermans for every Tiger. In the end, Germany churned out less than 2,000 Tiger tanks. The United States knocked out 50,000 Shermans. Finally, the technology itself. Yes, traditional shells would bounce off the armor plating of the Tiger, but this is just one half of that tried and tested problem-solution dynamic. The United States and the Soviets were able to develop anti-tank guns that could damage or even disable a Tiger, but only the United States was able to mount these guns on Shermans. On May 8, 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allies and the war in Europe was over. The German military machine and its elite soldiers and much vaunted hardware were defeated. With Tiger tanks and Me-262 jet aircraft and majestic battleships like the Bismarck and Tirpitz, the Germans had led the world in terms of military technology, but these war machines would eventually come to naught. There were just too many other factors at play, and the Germans found that engineering prowess would not be enough to stem the tide of the Allied advance. As resources grew scarce, Leviathans like the Tiger became more a hindrance than help. For a little while though, the whole world cowered when the Tiger roared. What do you make of the Tiger I and Tiger II tanks? Are they as impressive as they appear, or is this another example of the legend getting in the way of the truth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.